Hi everybody, this is my review of Minishoot Adventures. I played this game on Steam and I beat it the entire way with 100% completion. Here is a screenshot of my save file to prove it. I know it looks completely empty here, but for those that have completed the game, if you know, you know. TLDR, I love this game. It's super duper good. It's basically The Legend of Zelda on NES if it was a twin-stick shooter instead. It is a strange combination on the surface of it, but trust me, it works and it works well. There's a ton of fun puzzles, cool bosses, dungeons, and enemies to fight with good upgrades that make the game more fun to play. It runs well, plays well, sounds well, it looks well, and you are rewarded for exploring. Everything about this game is just super duper solid and fun. I highly recommend it to pretty much anyone, especially for its affordable $15 price tag. And now, here is the full review. I had no idea that Minishoot Adventures existed. I was listening to the Jeff Gersman podcast and heard that he was having a lot of fun with this game, so I decided to look it up and see some videos on it. I thought it looked really cool, so I bought it on Steam and gave the game a shot. Before I knew it, I had like 6 hours on my save file for just one game session, and then I beat it in my second session. So, in 2 sittings, I concluded that the game is very good, and I've had this itch to talk about it ever since. So yeah, here I go. Let's begin with the pros, which are many, and then we'll move on to some criticisms, which surprisingly there are a decent amount of actually, but not enough to ruin the experience, of course. So let's begin. Let's kick it off with the pros. Number 1, I would say, is the art style. Some people have complained that the visuals are not great, that the art style looks like basic placeholder elements that were bought on the Unity Asset Store, or perhaps something that should be running in Flash on Newgrounds. But I'll be honest, even though the graphics do admittedly look fairly basic, I don't think the game looks bad at all. I think it looks quite nice actually. The game shows off really colorful and bright colors that clearly indicate a change in scenery and distinctions between friend or foe. At least I'll speak for myself and say that I never lost track of where my little ship was anytime I was having a crazy bullet hell fight. I don't think the game would improve significantly if it was this hyper-realistic ray tracing showcase. I like these nice, welcoming cartoon visuals. It sort of allows for pretty much anybody to get into this game. It ironically feels a lot more unique than other games lately that have been trying to be either too stylish or too realistic. And even with this relatively simple look, they do manage to be creative, with tons of different enemies to fight. There are small ships, big ships, walking bushes that shoot you in the forest, and even giant snake ships that you have to fight in the middle of a desert. It might not be the greatest looking game in the world, but I think it still does its job well, and still manages to exude charm and creativity despite that. Number 2, barely any text or dialogue. There is very little text or explicit dialogue scenes present throughout the game. Outside of some very basic stuff like going through the menus obviously, or buying upgrades, reading what they do, and tiny bits of lore here and there. There's really not a lot here in terms of like actually sitting down and reading stuff for an extended period of time. Most of it is a purely visual affair where you figure out how the game works by yourself with very little help, and I love that. If there's anything in this game that reminds me of Zelda 1 the most, it's definitely this, the just get plopped into a world and just go figure everything out on your own. Since there really is not a lot to read in this game, I think it can be played by basically anyone with little to no struggle. Number 3, not very punishing. There's not a lot of punishment for dying, which depending on who you are, this might be good or bad. For me, it's fine, because it lets me explore more freely and without really hesitating too much. All of that stress of dying isn't really there, and I can just go off and explore without worrying too much. I feel that for a big world like this one, dying and getting punished harshly for it would annoy me, and I probably would have put the game down out of frustration, but gladly that's not the case here. There are a few checkpoints here and there, particularly in dungeons, which I think is enough of a punishment for me to just pull me back there and have me redo the fights after getting killed. Number 4, there's lots of stuff to collect. There's a ton of items and special upgrades to discover, so it's in your best interest to just explore everything and find as many secrets as you can. Some upgrades require special red gems that you can trade in, but you'll mostly get those from fighting strong enemies. This encourages you to keep on fighting instead of just running away from them. Not engaging in fights will not give you enough experience points or red gems for buying things and leveling up. so you'll need to sharpen your bullet health skills to get rewards in the long run. Overall, I do think these items are absolutely worth getting, so even though you don't have to get most of them, it would be in your best interest to do so. Number 5, it just feels great to play. Controls feel good and responsive with your little ship smoothly turning and zooming around the map. It's one of those games that just feels good to move around in and shoot stuff. And it only gets better when you rack up upgrades and start zipping around super fast, dodging bullets everywhere and surviving in the slickest way ever. And if you go through the trouble of collecting everything in this game, then you'll be rewarded with a super decked out ship that will give you a decent amount of stuff to play with during battles. Even the sound of shooting and hitting certain materials is also very satisfying to hear in an almost ASMR kind of way, which adds to how good it feels to have the game in your hands and playing it yourself with a good pair of headphones. Number 6, exploration is rewarded well. So as I alluded to before, there's a lot of exploration to be done in this big map, but a ton of it is optional. You could seriously blast your way to the final boss very quickly by just ignoring everything. Just doing all of the essential stuff to get to the end and that's it, but you would be doing yourself a disservice in my opinion. I'd say that most of the fun to be had is through getting lost, fighting whatever you bump into, finding secrets, and discovering a bunch of new items that you can use to your advantage. And sometimes you'll find some super essential, very important upgrades that will open up the map to you even more. I would rather spoil as little of the game as possible, but I do think it bears mentioning that although the game is fairly short, running at maximum around 10 to 11 hours, there are more things for you to do after seeing the credits roll. And even if you do complete 100% of the map, there is still more stuff that gets unlocked. Again, I don't want to spoil anything, but if you're looking for a game that actually rewards you for being a completionist, then this one won't disappoint you. All you have to know is that if you play this game and you see the credits, just know that it's not over yet. And for $15, I'd say that this game is pretty good value for that. So those are all the positives out of the way. Now let's get into some criticisms. Number 1, the music is whatever. The music is unfortunately pretty forgettable and I didn't really feel anything for it. Of course, it's not a big deal for most and definitely not a deal breaker, but music does mean a lot to me in games, so the generic feeling of it didn't really stick out to me all that much. Every jingle when you do something good sounds exactly like what you'd expect. Boss battle music sounds like boss battle music, overworld music sounds like overworld music. Nothing really stood out to me, which is a shame. People were ragging on the art style, that it looked generic and something out of the Unity asset store, but you see, I think the opposite. I think the music feels really generic and feels like it was on the Unity asset store or something like that, so yeah, I think it would have been cool if the music was, if it was just a little better. Number 2, boss battles aren't great until the very, very end. The boss battles, although fun, I feel go on for way too long. There are some special enemies out there in the world that aren't even bosses, but are also super bullet spongy. And this, even with me having a ton of upgrades under my belt, it still takes forever for me to take down certain enemies, boss or otherwise. Another point I would give for the bosses specifically is that they feel kinda samey towards the end. A lot of the same bug with shield that you can only shoot from behind kind of boss. It left me wanting something a little bit more creative and different. I'll say this much, I never really felt like I was truly being challenged by the bosses until the post-game, where, as I said before, if you complete the entire map 100% and beat the true boss and everything, there's a special area that gets unlocked that will allow you to fight much more challenging bosses. And those were super fun to beat. I just wish that same level of fun was spread out through the regular game instead of just endgame content. Also, I felt that a lot of the bosses had like 9 different phases to them, which sort of adds to why they are so long to begin with, but just a pet peeve, not actually that big of a deal. But anyway, now that we're on the topic of endgame content, let's get to the next point. Number 3, the ending's not that important. I also don't wish to spoil this ending for you, but I do think that it is necessary to mention that if you want to rush all the way to the end, don't. Without revealing too many details, I found both the final boss and the ending to be super generic and disappointing. It further cemented the idea for me that getting to the end is not the point of the game at all, but rather to explore the world and find everything, which then unlocks more things beyond the regular ending, and all of that other stuff is more satisfying. So just keep in mind that if you really want to get the most out of this game, then it is in your best interest to explore, find everything that you can, beat the map 100%, and then face the final boss, and then the true final boss after that. And of course, you can enjoy all of the post-game content that comes from doing all of that as well. Number 4, a bit difficult to track progress. So now that we're on the topic of exploring and completing the map, here's a little pet peeve that I bumped into. So eventually you will find an upgrade that shows you your progress on the map, including places that you have visited before, with some things you might have missed. This is all well and good, but sometimes these places that you revisit with things that you missed will involve stuff that you don't have access to yet. Or sometimes the caves that are labeled are just tiny areas where you can't do anything. It's mainly labeled because it is within the same area of a special item, but you actually need to go through a different entrance to reach it. By having this useless hole be labeled, it just confuses the hell out of me, and it makes me think that there is more to do there, but I've actually exhausted everything that there is to do there in that specific spot. Because if it's in the same room as something special, then it'll mark it, even though, like, that's not the place where I can get it. I think it would have been much better and significantly less confusing to just not mark these spots, and instead mark the spot that will actually lead you to the special item, as opposed to a bunch of dead ends that happen to be close to the item that I want, but still labeling them like they're important anyway. It was such a frustrating waste of time to go back to a cave that was marked, and then realizing, oh yeah, I forgot, this place is totally useless, now I gotta go wander around and check somewhere else. I just didn't really see the point of marking the caves that way. That's like getting a treasure map where X marks the spot, but instead of one X, there's like 7 X's, and you have to randomly go and search which one of the X's actually has the treasure, when you could have easily just had a 1. Number 5, races are not interesting or challenging. The races aren't that great, and all of them are super easy to win. I think there was maybe one race that I had to do twice, but all of the other ones I could beat them on the first try. Not very fun, honestly. I could have done without them. If this game ever gets a sequel, then this is something I definitely want to see iterated on a lot more. I'm sorry that I don't have a lot here that's meaningful to say regarding the races, because that's just how bare bones they are. It's kind of sad that I have to say this about the races, because ironically, the races are probably one of the most important things you have to do in order to really truly complete the game. You have to win every single race in the game for you to be able to unlock a special upgrade that is honestly fantastic. It's one of the best upgrades in the whole game. And it's just frustrating that you have to go through all of these boring-ass races to be able to unlock it. And then when you unlock that upgrade, that also gives you access to some really significant post-game content. So yeah, I just wish that the races were a lot more interesting, a lot more fun to play, because when you want to get to those upgrades and you want to get to those newer areas, you just have to power through them, and it doesn't feel like fun, it just feels like homework that you have to check off a list. And finally, we have number 6, the most whatever who cares story ever. The story's fairly generic, and I never really cared for it. You could very easily oversimplify the story and say, Pretty Color's world is invaded by the purple, and the purple is bad, so you explore the world to destroy the purple and save the world. The end. There are some bits of lore that you can discover and read up on, but I'll be honest, I could never really bring myself to care about it. I had significantly more fun just exploring that world and picking up all the pieces with everything the game was showing me visually, as opposed to full-on text boxes. I'll be honest, if all of the lore and the text and the story was removed from the game, I really would not feel like there was something missing here. And now, my conclusion. I think it's really good, despite its flaws. It's simply so much fun to play, and it has enough stuff going on frequently enough that I was always engaged for its 10-hour runtime. Despite it being so short, I felt that the game was much longer than that, in a good way. As soon as I felt that the game was slowing down and going through the motions, I had already reached the end. It was solid and enjoyable the whole way through before it got anywhere close to outstaying its welcome. The pure gameplay is what sells Minishoot Adventures, and not necessarily all the lore that I could honestly live without. If this 2-man developer team ever makes a sequel to this, I think there's a lot that they can improve on, and I will be there to check it out if they ever do. Because I honestly had a great time playing this. For $15 on Steam, I highly recommend that you all get this game. The developers truly deserve the support.